This is the iPad 7th generation. Don't buy it. Let me tell you why. So first of all, the processor inside here is the very old Apple A10 from way back in 2016. Remember the iPhone 7? Right now we're at iPhone 15. So this thing is just a really old processor. So that means that when it comes to playing games or doing intense things like, for example, video editing, you'll find that it's quite laggy when it comes to these intense tasks. Now, of course, if all you're doing is going to be watching YouTube videos with this thing, yeah, it's great. I have no problem with that. However, at this point, this thing is going to be 4 years old, and that means that it's only going to get slower, not faster. So if you're planning to play a bit of games or all that stuff, this thing is not good. For example, I occasionally play some COD M, and if I want good frames per second, I have to run medium to low graphics settings, because at high, this thing gets really hot towards the top right here where the chip is. It starts to throttle and slow down. So when I'm screen recording and playing games at the same time, it starts to become slow, which is not good. Next thing is the microphone. Maybe it's just my specific model, but the microphone on here is really bad. I don't know why it's so bad. I actually had to buy an external microphone because this one was just so bad. So when it came to like recording videos with this thing, this is a test recording using the iPad 7th generation microphone. So this thing apparently has two microphones. One is at the top, right next to the headphone jack and the power button. And then there's another one at the back of the iPad, located very close to the one on the top of the iPad. So the purpose of recording voiceovers, I did find that this microphone was not the best. So even a cheap microphone like the Boya M1 that I was using is much better suited to the job. As of January 2023, this iPad still supports the latest version of iOS. However, due to the lack of power on this iPad, we don't get the Stage Manager feature that you'll find on the newer iPads, the M1s and M2 one specifically. Then camera-wise, you got a 720p camera here, which is obviously very low resolution, and then an 8 megapixel at the back. It's not that good. I feel like they haven't changed it in years. But let's be honest, who's taking photos with an iPad, right? Now, when you're scrolling across the home screen, for example, or you're messing with the widgets, things can feel a little bit laggy. Because once in a while, I'll borrow a friend's iPad Air 4th generation with the A14, and every single time, even though the refresh rate is the same 60, it still feels a bit smoother. So if I were you, try and see if you can spend a bit more for the iPad 8th with the Apple A12. Okay, so now let's compare this thing to the predecessor to this one and the successor. So iPad 7, you got the iPad 6 on the left and the iPad 8, which came afterwards. So the iPad 6 versus the iPad 7. The iPad 7 has the benefit of being slightly larger, 10.2 inches in screen size compared to 9.7. This is very useful when it comes to multitasking. For example, you can have multiple windows open like this, there you go, slide over plus this thing, and you can even run a picture-in-picture window for, let's say, YouTube, for example. And that extra screen real estate is very useful, especially when it comes to using things like the Apple Pencil. If you're going to be writing notes with good notes or whatever, the extra screen size is going to be greatly appreciated. And with this bigger body size, you also get the ability to use the smart connector. So the smart keyboard that works with this one, the iPad 7, is the same one that you use for the iPad Air 3rd generation. So you can go ahead and use that with this one and be able to type faster and all that kind of stuff. This thing also has 3 gigabytes of RAM, which is much more than the 2 gigabytes in the iPad 6. This means, of course, that the multitasking that I showed you earlier is much better. Apps will get reloaded a lot less often. But if you're not really someone who uses a ton of different apps, it's not really a big of a deal. But I'm honestly impressed with how well this thing holds apps in memory. I'll leave this thing for a couple of days, I'll open up YouTube, and it'll still be exactly where I left it, which is very cool, and it saves me lots of time. It also means that the widgets here should be much more reliable compared to the iPad 6, even though they both use the same processor. Now, compared to the newer iPad 8, the main difference is pretty much just the CPU. But honestly, I feel like the A12 makes such a big difference that you might actually want to spend a little bit extra for the iPad 8. The better performance also means that you get longer software updates. Then of course you have the iPad 9 and the iPad 10. But at that point, those ones are significantly better, but much more expensive compared to this one. So I'm not really going to compare them. They're obviously better, but they're more expensive. Now, battery life wise, this thing still gives me a decent amount. I don't really measure it. It'll easily last a whole day of usage. For my specific situation where I'll sometimes watch YouTube, sometimes take notes, it's very useful for that. But if you're not a frequent user of this thing, it'll last you a couple of days, no problem. You'll be very happy with the battery life on this thing. If you have any questions about this thing, let me know.